Welcome to the world of science function. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. It was supposed to be an ordinary reconnaissance mission, a routine scan of a newly discovered planet flagged by the Interstellar Alliance. As far as Lieutenant Sarah Quinn knew, it would be another humdrum week cataloging flora and fauna, extracting soil samples, and logging atmospheric data. The planet, designated 4Z347, seemed like just another lush, uninhabited Eden, orbiting a distant sun with perfect Goldilocks zone conditions. At least, that's what the reports had said. But the reports were wrong. The moment Sarah's shuttle pierced the atmosphere, she felt it in her gut, something was off. For one, the lush canopy of emerald green forests stretched endlessly below her, unbroken by oceans, rivers, or lakes, defying every known model of planetary hydrology. For another, the shuttle's sensors, state-of-the-art tech capable of scanning down to the microbial level, began spitting out error messages as soon as they tried to assess the surface. And then there was the energy signature, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably artificial. Sarah's co-pilot, Corporal Lennox, was the first to voice what they were both thinking. "This planet's not empty," he said, his voice laced with unease. His hands hovered over the controls, knuckles white. "We've got company." Sarah leaned closer to the viewport, her sharp eyes narrowing as she caught a glint of something metallic nestled in the canopy below. A structure. Or at least, part of one. It was large, symmetrical, and, judging by the thin, jagged spires poking above the trees, not natural. Before she could respond, a wave of static crackled through their comms, cutting through the cockpit like a cold blade. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood on end as the static gave way to an eerie, rhythmic pulse, an unmistakable signal. "That's not Alliance tech," Sarah muttered, her voice low and tense. She adjusted the shuttle's receivers, trying to isolate the signal. The pulse grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat reverberating through the ship. "It's an invitation," Lennox said grimly. His voice carried a note of resignation, as if he already knew there was no turning back. Against her better judgment, Sarah adjusted their course toward the signal. As a seasoned officer, she knew it was risky, potentially suicidal, but the mission protocol was clear: investigate all anomalies. With a deft touch, she guided the shuttle toward the source, the structure growing larger and more menacing with every passing second. When they finally broke through the canopy, the sight that greeted them was unlike anything they'd seen before. The structure was massive, a sprawling complex of black, jagged architecture that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. Strange, geometric symbols glowed faintly along its surface, their meaning indecipherable but undeniably alien. Surrounding the structure was an army of automated drones, their sleek forms hovering in precise, synchronized patterns. "Okay," Lennox breathed, his usual bravado replaced with genuine apprehension. "This is way above our pay grade." Before Sarah could agree, the shuttle's controls locked up. Warning lights flared across the console as the ship was forcibly pulled toward the complex by an invisible force. "Magnetic tether!" Sarah shouted, frantically trying to override the controls. But it was no use. They were being dragged straight into the heart of the alien structure, like a fly caught in a spider's web. The shuttle landed with a jarring thud inside a cavernous hangar bathed in an eerie, blue-green light. As the engines powered down, Sarah and Lennox exchanged a glance. Neither of them spoke, but the message was clear: they were in deep trouble. The hangar was empty save for a single figure standing in the shadows at its center. Tall and unnervingly thin, it stepped forward with an elegance that belied its otherworldly form. Its skin shimmered like liquid mercury, and its eyes, if they could be called that, were swirling vortexes of light. It didn't speak, not in any conventional sense, but its presence was overwhelming, filling the space with an oppressive weight. Then, without warning, it spoke, not with words, but with thoughts, projected directly into their minds. "Welcome, humans." Sarah staggered under the force of the alien's psychic voice. It was like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm, the words crashing through her skull with the weight of a freight train. Lennox gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists. The alien tilted its head, studying them with an intensity that felt invasive. "You are predators," it said, its tone a curious mix of admiration and disdain. "Your species thrives through dominance and cunning. But there is one among you, one faction, that surpasses all others." Sarah frowned, her mind racing. What was it talking about? Before she could respond, the alien's eyes flared, and the hangar was suddenly filled with projections, scenes of humanity's past, present, and future. Wars, conquests, acts of bravery and cruelty. And then, the focus narrowed, zeroing in on a single group, Americans. The alien's voice took on a darker edge. "They are exceptional. Ruthless. Predators of predators." Sarah's stomach twisted. The alien wasn't wrong. Humanity's history was littered with examples of American military dominance, often brutal and unrelenting. But hearing it framed this way, stripped of context and nuance, made her uneasy. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The alien's gaze shifted to her, its expression unreadable. "To understand," it said simply. "To learn what makes your kind, your predators, so formidable." Before Sarah could react, the alien raised a slender hand, and the world around her dissolved into darkness. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the hangar anymore. She was standing in the middle of a dense jungle, the air thick with humidity and the sound of distant gunfire. Lennox was beside her, his face pale but determined. And looming in the distance was a massive figure, a hulking, shadowy predator with glowing red eyes. The alien's voice echoed in her mind. "Prove yourselves." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just a test. It was a game. And the stakes were survival. The air was electric, pulsing with an energy that made every hair on Sarah's body stand on end. Her boots sank slightly into the damp jungle floor as she scanned the dense foliage around her. Every tree, vine, and shadow seemed alive, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting. "Lennox," she whispered, her voice low and urgent, "stay close." "Trust me, I'm not going anywhere," Lennox muttered, his grip tightening on the unfamiliar weapon now slung over his shoulder. It wasn't theirs. The sleek, black rifle, bristling with alien tech, had appeared in his hands the moment they were transported to this strange simulation, or whatever it was. Sarah's own weapon was equally foreign, lightweight yet powerful, with controls that hummed under her fingers as though alive. The alien's voice echoed in her mind again, cold and detached. "Your predators, the Americans, thrive because they adapt. They innovate. They survive by any means necessary. Show me." Sarah bit back a curse. It wasn't just a test, it was a twisted experiment. And somewhere out there, stalking the jungle like a phantom, was whatever nightmare the alien had conjured up to hunt them. "Prove ourselves," Sarah muttered under her breath, tightening her grip on the weapon. "Fine. Let's give them a show." They moved cautiously, every step deliberate and soundless. The jungle was a labyrinth of towering trees and twisting vines, the canopy so dense that only fragmented beams of sunlight pierced through, casting ghostly patterns on the ground. The sounds of distant gunfire and explosions were constant, but no source was visible. It was disorienting, like being trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. Lennox suddenly froze, his hand shooting up in a signal to stop. Sarah crouched low, her eyes darting to where he was pointing. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then she saw it, a hulking, reptilian creature lurking just beyond the treeline, its glowing red eyes cutting through the gloom like twin beacons. It was massive, easily twice the size of a man, with claws that gleamed like polished steel and a thick, muscular tail that swayed menacingly behind it. "Tell me that's part of the simulation," Lennox whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's hope so," Sarah replied, though her gut told her otherwise. The thing moved with a predatory grace, its movements too fluid, too real to be some holographic construct. It was alive. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating through the air like a physical force. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to run, but she held her ground, raising her weapon. If they were going to survive, they couldn't afford to panic. The creature lunged. Sarah barely had time to react. She fired a burst of plasma bolts, the weapon kicking back with surprising force. The bolts struck the creature square in the chest, but instead of falling, it only seemed enraged. It roared, a deafening sound that rattled her bones, and charged again. "Move," she shouted, diving to the side as the creature's claws tore through the air where she'd been standing. Lennox fired wildly, his shots grazing the creature's flank but doing little to slow it down. They scrambled through the jungle, weaving between trees and ducking under low-hanging branches. The creature was relentless, crashing through the foliage like a living tank. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of a way to outmaneuver it. The alien had said they needed to adapt. If brute force wasn't working, they'd have to get creative. "This way," she shouted, leading Lennox toward a dense cluster of vines hanging from a towering tree. They ducked behind the thick vegetation, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature slowed, sniffing the air as it searched for its prey. Sarah's eyes darted around, searching for anything she could use. Her gaze landed on a cluster of large, spiked fruits hanging from the tree above. They were heavy, their sharp edges glinting faintly in the dappled sunlight. An idea sparked in her mind. "Lennox," she whispered, gesturing toward the fruits. "Shoot the base of those branches when I give the signal." "What?" "Why?" He stopped himself, nodding. He didn't need to understand. He just needed to trust her. The creature prowled closer, its glowing eyes scanning the shadows. Sarah stepped out from behind the vines, raising her weapon to draw its attention. The creature snarled, its massive claws digging into the earth as it prepared to lunge again. "Now," she shouted. Lennox fired, his shots precise despite the chaos. The branches holding the spiked fruits snapped, sending them plummeting down like deadly projectiles. The fruits struck the creature, their sharp edges cutting into its thick hide. It let out a pained roar, thrashing wildly as the fruits continued to rain down. Sarah didn't waste a second. She fired at the creature's exposed underbelly, her plasma bolts finally finding their mark. The creature staggered, its movements growing sluggish as it bled a strange, luminescent liquid. "Go!" Sarah shouted, grabbing Lennox's arm and pulling him away. The creature collapsed behind them, its roars fading into a low, guttural growl. They didn't stop running until they reached a clearing, their breaths ragged and their hearts pounding. Sarah dropped to her knees, her weapon still clutched tightly in her hands. "That was insane," Lennox said, collapsing beside her. "You realize that, right?" Sarah managed a weak smile. "Adapt or die, right?" Before Lennox could respond, the alien's voice filled their minds again. "Impressive. But the test is far from over." The ground beneath them began to tremble. Sarah's smile faded as she looked around, her exhaustion replaced by a fresh wave of adrenaline. From the shadows of the jungle, more creatures emerged, smaller than the first, but no less dangerous. Their glowing eyes fixed on the humans, their claws gleaming in the faint light. Sarah stood, her grip on her weapon tightening. "Looks like round 2. The jungle erupted into chaos once more. The jungle was alive with chaos. The shrieks and guttural growls of the creatures reverberated through the dense canopy, mingling with the sound of Sarah and Lennox's rapid footfalls. The new wave of predators was faster, more coordinated, and disturbingly intelligent. Each movement was calculated, their glowing red eyes locked onto the fleeing humans. Sarah's mind raced as she darted through the underbrush, her weapon clutched tightly in her hands. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her muscles burning from exertion. The alien's voice echoed in her thoughts again, cold and relentless. "You adapt quickly, but your survival is far from assured. The predators are relentless, as you must be." "Relentless predators?" Sarah muttered bitterly, glancing over her shoulder at the pursuing creatures. "I think we've got enough of those already." "Focus!" Lennox hissed, narrowly avoiding a claw swipe from one of the smaller beasts. The creature snarled, its fangs glinting as it lunged again, only to be met with a precise burst of plasma fire from Lennox's rifle. The creature crumpled to the ground, but its packmates were undeterred, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "We can't keep running like this," Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the din of the chase. "We need a plan." Lennox fired another shot, buying them a moment's reprieve. "You're the strategist. I'm just the guy who shoots things." Sarah's mind worked furiously, piecing together what little they knew about the aliens' twisted game. The predators were faster and stronger, but they weren't invincible. The first creature had fallen when they exploited its environment. If they wanted to survive, they'd need to use the jungle to their advantage again. "Follow me," Sarah barked, veering sharply to the left. Lennox didn't question her, falling into step behind her as they weaved through the thick foliage. The creatures pursued relentlessly, their snarls growing louder with each passing second. Sarah led them toward a narrow ravine, its steep walls lined with jagged rocks and tangled roots. It wasn't much, but it was the only terrain that offered any hope of slowing their pursuers. She skidded to a halt at the edge, peering down into the dark abyss below. "This is your plan?" Lennox asked incredulously, glancing nervously at the drop. "Because I'm not sure jumping into a death pit is much of a strategy." "Not jumping," Sarah corrected, her gaze scanning the ravine's edge. She spotted a massive vine dangling precariously over the side, its thick strands wound tightly around a cluster of trees. It wasn't perfect, but it might just be enough. "Help me with this," she ordered, grabbing hold of the vine and yanking it free. Lennox hesitated for a split second before joining her, his hands gripping the vine as they pulled it loose. The creatures closed in, their claws scraping against the rocks as they prepared to pounce. "Now!" Sarah shouted, her voice a mix of desperation and determination. Together, they swung the vine across the ravine, anchoring it around a thick branch on the other side. The makeshift bridge swayed dangerously, but it held. "Go!" Sarah urged, shoving Lennox toward the vine. He hesitated again, his eyes flicking to the snarling creatures mere feet away. "Don't argue, just move," she snapped. Lennox gritted his teeth and climbed onto the vine, shimmying across with surprising agility. Sarah turned to face the approaching predators, her weapon raised. She fired in rapid succession, the plasma bolts slicing through the air and striking the creatures with precision. One fell, then another, but the rest kept coming. As Lennox reached the other side, Sarah grabbed the vine and began her own perilous crossing. The creatures lunged at her, their claws scraping against the rocky edge of the ravine. One of them leapt onto the vine, its weight causing it to sway violently. Sarah tightened her grip, her heart pounding as she tried to maintain her balance. "Hang on!" Lennox shouted from the other side, raising his rifle. He fired a shot, striking the creature and sending it plummeting into the abyss below. The vine steadied, and Sarah scrambled the rest of the way across, collapsing onto the ground beside Lennox. They barely had time to catch their breath before the remaining creatures began searching for another way across. Their glowing eyes scanned the ravine, their guttural growls reverberating ominously. "That won't hold them for long," Lennox panted. "What now?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her mind was already racing ahead, analyzing the terrain and searching for their next move. The jungle was a maze of obstacles and opportunities, and they needed to stay one step ahead if they wanted to survive. "We keep moving," she said finally, pushing herself to her feet. "The alien wants us to adapt? Fine. Let's show it what humans are really made of." They pressed on, their pace steady but cautious. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the dense foliage creating an almost suffocating atmosphere. The sounds of the pursuing creatures faded, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even more unnerving. "Do you think they gave up?" Lennox asked, his voice low. Sarah shook her head. "Not a chance. They're just waiting for the right moment." That moment came sooner than expected. The ground beneath them suddenly gave way, sending them tumbling into a hidden pit. They landed hard, the impact jarring but not debilitating. Sarah groaned, pushing herself up and surveying their surroundings. The pit was deep, its walls slick with mud and impossible to climb. "Well, this is just great," Lennox muttered, wincing as he rubbed his shoulder. "Got any brilliant ideas this time?" Sarah's eyes narrowed as she noticed something glinting in the dim light. Embedded in the walls of the pit were shards of metal, broken pieces of what appeared to be ancient machinery. She reached out, brushing away the dirt to reveal intricate carvings and symbols similar to those on the alien structure. "It's not just a pit," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "It's part of the experiment." Before Lennox could respond, the symbols began to glow, and the air around them crackled with energy. A low hum filled the pit, growing louder and more intense. Sarah gripped her weapon, her instincts screaming that something was about to happen. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the pit transformed. They were no longer in the jungle. They stood in a massive arena, its walls lined with alien spectators. The creatures that had been hunting them prowled at the edges, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans. And at the center of the arena, standing tall and imposing, was the original predator, the massive, hulking beast they had encountered first. The alien's voice echoed through the arena, cold and unyielding. "Your final challenge. Survive." Sarah exchanged a glance with Lennox, her jaw set and her eyes blazing with determination. "Ready?" she asked. "Not even close," Lennox replied, raising his weapon. "But let's do this anyway." The beast roared, and the arena erupted into chaos. The roar of the hulking predator echoing through the air as it charged towards Sarah and Lennox. The alien spectators lining the walls watched silently, their glowing forms radiating in eerie anticipation. This was it, the culmination of the aliens' twisted test, the final trial that would determine whether they lived or died. Sarah's mind raced as she raised her weapon, firing a rapid volley of plasma bolts at the approaching beast. The shots struck its thick, armored hide, but the creature barely flinched, its relentless momentum undeterred. She darted to the side just as the massive claws raked the air where she had been standing, the force of the swipe sending a shockwave through the ground. "Lennox," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need a plan." Lennox was already moving, firing precise bursts to keep the smaller predators at bay. "Working on it," he yelled back, his voice laced with equal parts fear and determination. The arena wasn't just a battleground, it was a death trap. The walls shimmered with alien energy, and the ground beneath their feet shifted unpredictably, creating treacherous obstacles and narrow pathways. The predators used the terrain to their advantage, circling their prey with predatory precision. Sarah's eyes darted around, searching for anything they could use. Her gaze landed on a series of glowing nodes embedded in the arena walls. They pulsed with an energy that seemed to resonate with the creatures, drawing them closer like a beacon. An idea began to form in her mind. "Lennox," she called, pointing toward the nodes. "I think those are controlling them. We need to take them out." "Easier said than done." Lennox shouted, narrowly dodging a smaller predator's lunge. He rolled to his feet, firing a shot that sent the creature sprawling. Sarah sprinted toward the nearest node, weaving through the chaos with practiced agility. The massive predator roared in frustration, its glowing eyes locking onto her as it gave chase. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm, her focus razor-sharp. Reaching the node, she slammed her hand against the panel, her weapon slung over her shoulder. The alien symbols on the device flared to life, and for a brief moment, she feared she had triggered another trap. But then the energy pulsing through the node flickered, and one of the smaller predators let out a pained screech before collapsing to the ground. "It's working," she yelled, glancing back at Lennox. "Keep them distracted." "Distracted?" "Sure, no problem." Lennox retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he ducked another attack. He fired off a burst of shots, forcing the smaller creatures to scatter. "Take your time, I've got this under control." The massive predator, however, was far from deterred. It charged toward Sarah, its claws gouging deep furrows in the arena floor. Sarah dove out of the way, narrowly avoiding its crushing weight as it slammed into the wall. The impact caused the node to spark and flicker, and Sarah seized the opportunity, pulling the trigger of her weapon and unleashing a focused burst of plasma. The node exploded in a shower of light, and another predator collapsed. "One down," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the din. 3 to go. The alien's voice echoed in her mind again, cold and unyielding. Impressive. But adaptability alone is not enough. You must prove your dominance. Sarah gritted her teeth, her frustration fueling her determination. You want dominance, she muttered. Fine. You'll get it. She sprinted toward the next node, Lennox covering her with a barrage of suppressive fire. The smaller predators were thinning out, their movements growing sluggish and disorganized as the nodes were destroyed. But the massive predator remained as relentless as ever, its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah with a single-minded intensity. Keep it busy, she called to Lennox as she reached the second node. This one was larger, its symbols glowing brighter than the last. She pressed her hand against the panel, her fingers dancing across the alien controls. The energy surged through her fingertips, and for a brief moment, she felt a connection, a glimpse into the alien intelligence behind the test. It wasn't just a test of survival. It was an experiment, a way for the aliens to understand what made humanity unique. They weren't just predators, they were innovators, survivors, and fighters. They adapted, not just to survive, but to thrive. The realization filled her with renewed determination. She deactivated the node, watching as another predator crumpled to the ground. Lennox whooped in triumph, his confidence bolstered by their progress. 2 down, she called, moving toward the third node. The massive predator roared, its fury palpable as it barreled toward her. Sarah's heart raced as she realized she wouldn't make it to the node in time. Lennox, she shouted. Take the shot. Lennox didn't hesitate. He aimed his rifle at the node and fired, his shot striking true. The node exploded, and the predator staggered, its movements growing sluggish as the energy tethering it to the arena began to falter. One more. Sarah yelled, sprinting toward the final node. The alien spectators watched in silence, their glowing forms flickering as if in anticipation. The massive predator, weakened but not defeated, let out one final, bone-chilling roar and lunged toward her. Sarah reached the node just as the creature closed in. With no time to think, she slammed her hand against the panel, pouring every ounce of her strength and will into the alien controls. The node's energy surged, and the predator froze mid-lunge, its body convulsing as the energy tether shattered. The arena fell silent. Sarah and Lennox stood panting, their weapons still raised as they surveyed the carnage. The predators lay motionless, their glowing eyes dimmed. The alien spectators remained still, their forms flickering as the energy in the arena began to dissipate. The alien's voice echoed one final time, its tone devoid of its previous coldness. You have proven your worth. Adaptability. Innovation. Resilience. These are the traits that make you formidable. You are not merely predators. You are survivors. The arena dissolved around them, and they found themselves back in the hangar of the alien structure. The towering alien figure stood before them, its swirling eyes fixed on Sarah and Lennox. We have learned much from you, it said. And in return, we grant you your freedom. Sarah exchanged a glance with Lennox, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over them. They didn't need words to convey what they were feeling. They had survived. Together. The aliens stepped back, and the hangar doors opened, revealing their shuttle, fully operational and waiting for them. Without hesitation, Sarah and Lennox climbed aboard, the weight of the ordeal beginning to lift as the engines roared to life. As they ascended into the stars, leaving the alien planet behind, Lennox let out a shaky laugh. So, what do we tell Command? Sarah smirked, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space ahead. The truth. Humans are survivors. But Americans? We're relentless. The shuttle disappeared into the void, leaving the alien world and its twisted test behind. But Sarah knew one thing for certain, they had left their mark. And the aliens would never forget what it meant to face humanity.